For 35 years, my son Marcus told everyone I was too old and embarrassing to attend his important events, until the day he discovered I had won $18 million in the Willowbrook State Lottery, and suddenly I wasn't too old for anything anymore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Eleanor Pemberton, and I spent decades believing that being a devoted mother meant staying in the shadows so my son could shine. From the time Marcus was born in our small apartment above Henderson's bakery in Millfield Creek, I knew my life would never be about me again. His father, David, walked out when Marcus was just 3 months old, leaving me with nothing but a crying baby, $73, and a determination that my son would never feel the sting of abandonment I had known my entire childhood. Those early years were brutal. I worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. Mornings at Sunrise Diner, flipping pancakes and brewing coffee for the early shift workers, afternoons cleaning offices at Pinnacle Business Park, and evenings babysitting the Richardson twins so other mothers could have date nights I'd never experience. Marcus spent those years being passed between Mrs. Chen next door and the daycare at Sacred Heart Community Center. But I made sure he never knew we were struggling. When Marcus started school, at Maplewood Elementary, I became that mother, the one who volunteered for every field trip, organized every bake sale, and stayed up until 2 in the morning crafting elaborate costumes for school plays. I remember spending my entire grocery budget on materials for his Revolutionary War outfit, then eating nothing but instant noodles for a week so he could look perfect as Benjamin Franklin. The other mothers always complimented my creativity, never knowing that each intricate detail represented another meal I'd skipped. School brought new challenges. Marcus discovered football and suddenly needed equipment, camps, and private coaching that cost more than I made in months. I took on weekend shifts at Grandview Mall's department store, gift wrapping presents during holidays and folding clothes, until my fingers were raw. When Coach Bradley suggested Marcus attend quarterback elite camp in Silver Valley, a program that cost $3,000, I didn't hesitate. I sold my grandmother's engagement ring, the only valuable thing I owned, and told Marcus I'd been saving up for years. The lies became easier as time went on. When he needed a car for his senior year, I took out a loan I couldn't afford and told him his father had left money in an account. When he wanted to attend Westshore University instead of the community college we could actually afford, I worked double shifts for 2 years straight, my back aching from the physical labor, my eyes strained from the late-night data entry jobs. I picked up online. I told him I'd received a small inheritance from a distant relative. Through it all, Marcus excelled. Star quarterback, honor student, popular with everyone. I sat in those bleachers every Friday night, cheering louder than any other parent, my uniform from whatever job I'd rushed from still smelling like fryer grease or cleaning chemicals. The other parents knew me as Marcus's mom, the single mother who somehow managed to provide everything her son needed despite working service jobs. They respected my dedication, even if they kept their distance. College brought its own financial nightmares. Even with scholarships, there were expenses constantly arising. Textbooks, fraternity fees, spring break trips that everyone was going on. I refinanced my tiny house twice, maxed out credit cards, and took on tutoring sessions in the evenings after my regular jobs. When Marcus called upset that he couldn't afford to rush Sigma Phi Lambda like his roommate, I found a way to make it happen. When he needed money for a suit for formal events, I was there. When his laptop died during finals week, I somehow produced $800 overnight. What Marcus never knew was that I had been buying lottery tickets religiously for 22 years. Not many, just 1 or 2 tickets each week with the same numbers. His birthday, my birthday, the day I'd moved to Millfield Creek to start fresh, and the number of our first apartment. It was my only indulgence, my tiny rebellion against the practical, sacrificial life I'd built around his needs. Every Tuesday and Friday, I'd stop at Paulson's corner store and buy my tickets with whatever coins I'd found in couch cushions or saved from skipped lunches. I never expected to win. The lottery was my therapy, my way of dreaming about a different life for 3 minutes between buying the ticket and tucking it into my wallet. Sometimes I'd imagine what I'd do with the money. Travel to Ireland like my grandmother always wanted to, buy a house with a garden, maybe even take an art class like I'd dreamed about in high school. But mostly, I imagined giving Marcus everything he'd ever wanted without having to work myself into the ground. By the time Marcus graduated with his business degree from Westshire, I was 57 years old and felt like I was 80. My back was permanently curved from years of cleaning and lifting, my hands were scarred from kitchen accidents and rough work, and I hadn't bought myself new clothes in so long that everything I owned was either faded or patched. But Marcus was successful, confident, and ready to take on the world. I had done my job. He moved to Metropolitan City, got a position at Blackstone & Associates, and slowly began distancing himself from his old life. The calls became less frequent, the visits more brief. When he met Cassandra Wellington, a lawyer from a prominent Riverside Heights family, I could sense the change immediately. Suddenly, my working-class background became something to manage rather than celebrate. It started small. He'd correct my grammar in front of his friends. He'd suggest I dress more appropriately when meeting his colleagues. When Cassandra's parents visited, Marcus asked me to avoid mentioning my jobs, suggesting instead that I was between careers. The message was clear. I was becoming an embarrassment, a reminder of the humble origins he wanted to forget. The final blow came when Marcus announced his engagement at a dinner I'd scraped together money to attend at Riverside's most expensive restaurant. Surrounded by Cassandra's family, doctors, lawyers, business owners who spoke in polished sentences about their vacation homes and investments, I realized I had become invisible. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because my son had decided I wasn't the kind of mother who fit into his new world. That night, driving home in my 15-year-old Honda with a rattling engine and a prayer, I stopped at Paulson's corner store. One last time. I bought my usual tickets, thinking it might be time to stop this foolish habit. After all, what was the point of dreaming when you'd already given everything away? I had no idea that those tickets would change everything, or that the son who'd spent years making me feel ashamed of who I was would soon discover exactly how much his embarrassing mother was worth. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 weeks after Marcus's engagement dinner, I received a phone call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was getting ready for my shift at Sunrise Diner when my phone rang with an unknown number, Izzy. This Eleanor Pemberton of 247 Oakwood Lane, Millfield Creek. The voice was professional, almost robotic. Yes, this is Eleanor. Is everything all right? Ma'am, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Willowbrook State Lottery Commission. I'm calling to inform you that you are the sole winner of last Friday's jackpot drawing. The winning amount is $18,473,000. I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered on the kitchen floor, sending ceramic pieces skittering under the refrigerator. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what I'd just heard. Ma'am, are you still there? I think there's been a mistake, I whispered, sinking into the nearest chair. No mistake, ma'am. The winning numbers were 7, 15, 23, 31, 42, and the Powerball was 18. Do those numbers sound familiar? They were burned into my memory. Marcus's birthday, my birthday, the day I'd moved to Millfield Creek, the number of our first apartment, my age when he was born, and the day of the month I'd started my first job. My numbers, my impossible, beautiful numbers. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and verification processes. By afternoon, I was sitting in the lottery office in Riverside Heights, still wearing my diner uniform, staring at a check that had more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. The lottery officials explained my options. Take the lump sum of $11 million after taxes, or receive payments over 30 years. I chose the lump sum. After a lifetime of uncertainty, I wanted security now. But as I drove home with the check, safely deposited in a new account at First National Bank of Riverside, a strange emptiness settled over me. The first person I wanted to call was Marcus. The first thing I wanted to do was share this incredible news with my son, the person I'd sacrificed everything for. I imagined his excitement, his pride, maybe even his relief that his mother would never have to worry about money again. I called him that evening, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. "Mom, I'm kind of busy right now. Cassandra and I are planning the engagement party, and we have a lot to figure out." "Marcus, I have some incredible news. Something wonderful has happened, and can it wait? We're trying to finalize the guest list, and there are some complications we need to work through." The way he said complications made my stomach turn. "What kind of complications?" Marcus sighed heavily, the same sound he'd made as a teenager when I'd embarrassed him in front of his friends. "Mom, we need to talk about something important. Cassandra's family is very traditional. They have certain expectations about social circles and appearances. I don't understand what you're trying to say. The engagement party is going to be at the Wellington Country Club. It's a very upscale event, and Cassandra's parents are inviting some very important people. Business contacts, judges, politicians. You understand?" I didn't understand. Or rather, I was beginning to understand something I didn't want to accept. "Marcus, are you saying you don't want me at your engagement party?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. The tone he probably used in business meetings. "It's not that I don't want you there, Mom. It's just that this particular event requires a certain sophistication. The Wellingtons move in very specific social circles, and first impressions matter tremendously in Cassandra's world. I'm your mother, Marcus. I raised you. I sacrificed everything so you could have the education and opportunities that got you to this point. I know that, and I'm grateful. But Mom, you have to understand. You work at a diner. You don't know how to navigate these social situations. Last time you met Cassandra's parents, you talked about your cleaning jobs and how you had to take out loans for my education. It made everyone uncomfortable. The words hit me like physical blows. This was my son, the baby I'd held through countless sleepless nights, the child I'd cheered for at every game, the young man I'd put through college while eating rice and beans for dinner most nights. So what are you saying exactly? I'm saying that maybe it would be better if you didn't attend this particular event. The wedding will be different, more family-focused. But the engagement party is really more of a business function. I felt something break inside my chest, something that had been cracking for months, but had finally shattered completely. You're ashamed of me. Mom, please don't be dramatic. It's not about shame. It's about appropriate social contexts, and you're ashamed of the woman who worked 3 jobs to keep you fed and clothed. You're embarrassed by the mother who sold her only valuable possession so you could go to football camp. You think I'm too low class for your new girlfriend's family? That's not fair, Mom. I never asked you to make those sacrifices. The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. You never asked? Marcus, you were a child. Children don't ask their parents to sacrifice for them. Parents do it because they love their children unconditionally. Look, I know you did your best with what you had, but Cassandra and I are building a life together, and that life requires certain standards. I can't have my business associates seeing me as someone who comes from, well, from where we came from. Where we came from. As if our little apartment above Henderson's bakery was something shameful. As if the love and determination that had filled those cramped rooms was somehow embarrassing. as if the woman who had given him everything was now a liability to be managed. So you're uninviting me from your engagement party. I'm suggesting that your time might be better spent elsewhere. Maybe you could plan a nice dinner for us the following week? Something small and private? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Here I was, sitting on the biggest lottery win in Willowbrook State history, and my son was trying to hide me away like a shameful secret. The irony was so sharp it cut. I see, I said quietly. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. This is important for my career, for my future with Cassandra. Surely you want what's best for me? What's best for him? After 35 years of putting what was best for him ahead of everything else, my health, my dreams, my dignity, he was using those same words to justify cutting me out of his life. Of course I want what's best for you, Marcus. I always have. Then you understand why this is necessary. I understood more than he knew. I understood that the son I'd raised with such devotion had grown into a man who valued appearances over love, status over loyalty. I understood that in his climb toward social acceptance, he'd decided that his working-class mother was dead weight to be discarded. And I understood that I had a choice to make. I'll let you go, I said simply. I know. You're busy with your planning. Thanks for understanding, Mom. I knew you'd see reason. After I hung up, I sat in my small kitchen surrounded by the silence I'd lived with for so many years. The lottery check was real. The money was real. But the son I thought I'd raised, loving, grateful, loyal, apparently had never existed at all. For the first time since I'd received that life-changing phone call, I began to smile. The news of my exclusion from Marcus's engagement party spread through his circle faster than I had anticipated. What I didn't expect was how quickly his friends and even some family members would line up to justify his decision, making me feel like a pariah in my own son's life. The first call came from Marcus's college roommate, Trevor Blackwood, who now worked alongside him at Blackstone and Associates. Trevor had always been polite to me during college visits, even staying for dinner a few times when I'd scraped together enough money to cook something decent. But his tone now was completely different. Mrs. Pemberton, I hope you don't mind me calling. Marcus mentioned you were upset about the engagement party situation, and I thought maybe I could help you understand the bigger picture. I gripped the phone tighter. I'm listening, Trevor. Look, I've known Marcus for years, and he's worked incredibly hard to build his reputation at the firm. This engagement party isn't just a celebration. It's a networking event. Mr. Wellington has connections that could make or break Marcus's career trajectory. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices about how we present ourselves professionally. Are you saying I would damage his reputation? Trevor's uncomfortable laugh made my skin crawl. It's not personal, Mrs. Pemberton. It's just that in our industry, perception is everything. The Wellingtons are old money, country club types. They have certain expectations about the kind of families they associate with. Marcus is trying to fit into their world, and that requires some adjustments. Adjustments like pretending his mother doesn't exist? More like being strategic about when and how family is introduced into professional settings. I'm sure once Marcus is more established, things will be different. The conversation ended with Trevor suggesting I should be proud of how well Marcus is doing and that good mothers make sacrifices for their children's success. I hung up feeling sick to my stomach, but it was only the beginning. The next betrayal came from someone I never expected, my own sister, Janet Morrison. Janet lived in Riverside Heights, had married a successful accountant, and had always been quietly critical of my choices as a single mother. When she called 2 days after Trevor, I foolishly thought she might offer support. Eleanor, I heard about this whole engagement party drama from Marcus. Honestly, I think you're being a bit unreasonable. I nearly dropped the phone. Unreasonable? Janet, he uninvited me from his own engagement party. He didn't uninvite you? He suggested that maybe this particular event wasn't the right fit. There's a difference. Look, Ellie, I love you, but you have to admit that you and Marcus come from very different worlds now. He's educated, successful, marrying into a prominent family. Sometimes parents need to step back and let their children flourish in their new environments. Their new environments? Janet, I'm the one who made that new environment possible. I worked myself to the bone so he could get that education and those opportunities. And that was admirable. It really was. But now you need to accept that he's moved beyond the circumstances of his childhood. The Wellingtons are sophisticated people. They summer in the Hamptons and winter in Aspen. They attend charity galas and serve on museum boards. You work at a diner, Ellie. Can you honestly say you'd feel comfortable in that setting? The condescension in her voice was breathtaking. This was my own sister. Someone who'd grown up in the same working-class household I had, now talking as if I was some kind of embarrassment. I raised a son who's apparently so ashamed of where he came from that he can't bear to have me meet his future in-laws in a social setting. How exactly should I feel comfortable about that? You're being dramatic. Marcus isn't ashamed. He's being practical. Look, Robert and I have friends in similar circles, and I can tell you that these social dynamics are complex. It's not about love or loyalty. It's about knowing your place and not making situations awkward for everyone involved. Knowing my place? You know what I mean. Marcus has worked hard to build a certain image, and that image is important for his career and his marriage. Why would you want to jeopardize that just because your feelings are hurt? The conversation continued for another painful 10 minutes, with Janet suggesting that I was being selfish and small-minded for not understanding the realities of Marcus's new social position. She even had the audacity to suggest that I should be grateful that Marcus had achieved so much success despite his humble beginnings. By the time I hung up, I was shaking with rage and disbelief. My own sister, someone who'd borrowed money from me more than once over the years, was now lecturing me about knowing my place in my son's life. But the worst betrayal came from someone I'd considered family for over a decade. Mrs. Patricia. Chen, my elderly neighbor who had helped me raise Marcus during those early, desperate years. Mrs. Chen had been my lifeline when I was juggling multiple jobs, watching Marcus when I couldn't afford childcare, bringing us homemade meals when she knew money was tight. Marcus had called her Grandma Pat for most of his childhood. When she knocked on my door 3 days after Janet's call, I thought she was coming to offer comfort. Instead, she stood on my doorstep with a pained expression and carefully chosen words. Eleanor, dear, I need to speak with you about this situation with Marcus. I invited her in, made tea, and waited for her support. Instead, she delivered another devastating blow. Marcus called me yesterday. He's very upset about your reaction to the engagement party situation. He asked me to talk to you, to help you understand why you're making things difficult for him. I stared at her in disbelief. He asked you to talk to me? He's worried about you, Eleanor. He thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown, getting so upset over what he sees as a reasonable request. He reminded me of all the times you've been overwhelming in social situations. Overwhelming, Mrs. Chen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Remember his high school graduation party? You insisted on cooking all that food yourself, refusing help from the other parents. And at his college orientation, you asked so many questions about his meal plan and laundry facilities that he was embarrassed in front of his roommate's family. Each example she cited felt like a knife to my heart. These were moments when I'd been trying to be a good mother, trying to show love and concern for my son. Now they were being reframed as evidence of my social inadequacy. Eleanor, Marcus has grown into a successful, sophisticated young man. Maybe it's time to accept that your parenting job is done and step back so he can build his adult life without feeling like he has to manage your emotions. Manage my emotions? He told me you cried on the phone when he explained about the engagement party. He said you accused him of being ashamed of you, which he found very hurtful. This is supposed to be a happy time for him, and instead he's dealing with his mother's drama. I sat there stunned, watching this woman who had been like a mother to me repeat my son's version of events as if they were gospel truth. In his retelling, I was the unreasonable one, the dramatic one, the one causing problems during what should be a celebration. Mrs. Chen, I worked 3 jobs to put that boy through school. I sacrificed everything so he could have opportunities I never had. And now he's telling people I'm having a breakdown because I'm hurt that he doesn't want me at his engagement party? Sacrifices, yes. And they were admirable sacrifices. But Eleanor, sometimes parents sacrifice so much that they forget to develop themselves. Maybe Marcus is right. Maybe you have become too dependent on being needed by him. Maybe this is your chance to find your own life instead of living through his achievements. The conversation continued for another hour, with Mrs. Chen gently but firmly suggesting that I was being possessive, unrealistic, and emotionally manipulative. She painted Marcus as a loving son who was simply trying to navigate complex social expectations while managing his mother's inability to accept his new status in life. By the time she left, I felt completely isolated. Everyone, his friends, my sister, even the woman who'd helped raise him, had sided with Marcus. In their version of events, I was the problem. I was the embarrassing mother who couldn't accept that her son had outgrown her. I was the working-class woman who didn't understand sophisticated social dynamics. I was the burden he was trying to manage while building his new life. That night, I sat alone in my small kitchen, looking at the lottery ticket stub I'd kept as a memento, and realized something profound. Every single person who had lined up to defend Marcus's decision had one thing in common. None of them knew about the $18 million sitting in my bank account. They saw me exactly as Marcus had taught them to see me, as a poor, uneducated, socially awkward woman who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention her successful son was willing to throw her way. I wondered how quickly their tune would change once they learned the truth. For the first time since that devastating phone call, I began to plan my next move. 2 weeks after Mrs. Chen's visit, I decided it was time to confront Marcus directly about what I'd been hearing from his supporters. I couldn't let his version of events stand unchallenged any longer. The lottery money had given me something I'd never had before: the financial security to speak my truth without fear of consequences. I called Marcus on a Thursday evening, knowing he'd be home from work but before his usual dinner plans with Cassandra. When he answered, his voice carried that familiar tone of barely concealed irritation. "Mom, I'm really busy tonight. Cassandra and I are reviewing catering options for the engagement party, and we have appointments all weekend. Marcus, we need to talk about what you've been telling people about me." "What do you mean?" "I mean Trevor Blackwood calling to explain why I'm not suitable for your professional events. I mean Janet lecturing me about knowing my place. I mean Mrs. Chen suggesting I'm having some kind of breakdown because I was hurt by your decision." Tukti. Silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Marcus sighed heavily. "Mom, I haven't said anything that isn't true. You did get extremely emotional about the engagement party situation, and you have been making this much harder than it needs to be." "Making it harder?" "Marcus, you uninvited me from one of the most important celebrations of your life, and when I expressed that I was hurt, you told people I was being dramatic and unreasonable." "Because you were being dramatic. Mom, do you have any idea how stressful it is to plan a wedding while trying to manage your emotional reactions to every decision Cassandra and I make?" "Manage my emotional reactions? I'm your mother, not some unstable person you need to handle." "Really? Because calling me crying about how I'm ashamed of you, accusing me of forgetting where I came from, making me feel guilty for wanting to make a good impression on my future in-laws, that sounds pretty unstable to me." The casual cruelty of his words took my breath away. This was how he saw my pain? as instability, as something inconvenient that interfered with his plans. Marcus, I raised you by myself from the time you were 3 months old. I worked multiple jobs, went without meals, sold everything I owned to give you opportunities. When exactly did loving you and sacrificing for you become something to be managed? I never asked you to do any of those things. There it was again, that phrase that cut deeper each time he said it. You were a child, Marcus. Children don't ask their parents to love them and provide for them. Parents do it because it's what love means. But that doesn't mean I owe you my entire adult life as payment. I can't structure every decision around protecting your feelings. I have a career to build, a marriage to plan, a future to create. I can't do that if I'm constantly worrying about whether I'm hurting my mother's feelings. I never asked you to structure your entire life around me. I asked you to include me in your engagement party, and I explained why that wasn't practical. But instead of accepting my explanation like an adult, you turned it into this whole drama about love and sacrifice and abandonment. Do you know how exhausting that is for me? Exhausting? Marcus, you spent the first 22 years of your life as the center of my universe. Every decision I made was about what was best for you. I'm sorry if my feelings about being excluded from your life are exhausting for you. There it is again. Everything is about what you sacrificed, what you gave up, what you did for me. Do you know what it's like growing up with that kind of pressure? Do you know what it's like to have a mother who made you her entire reason for existing? His words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to process what I was hearing. Are you saying that my love for you was a burden? I'm saying that your need to be needed became a burden. I'm saying that making me the center of your universe put pressure on me that I never wanted. I'm saying that maybe if you'd built your own life instead of living through mine, you wouldn't be so devastated by normal adult boundaries. Normal adult boundaries? You mean like excluding your mother from family celebrations? I mean like recognizing that I'm not responsible for filling the holes in your life that you never bothered to fill yourself. The conversation was spiraling into territory I'd never imagined. My son wasn't just defending his decision to exclude me. He was attacking the very foundation of our relationship, rewriting our history to make my love and sacrifice seem pathological. Marcus, I don't understand where this is coming from. When did caring for you become something shameful? When did the sacrifices I made become weapons to use against me? They became weapons when you started using them to guilt me into making decisions based on your emotions instead of what's practical for my life. Every time I try to set a boundary, you bring up how much you sacrificed. Every time I make a choice you don't like, you remind me of what you gave up for me. Because those sacrifices were real. Because the love behind them was real. Because I thought they meant something to you. They did mean something to me. But they don't mean I owe you control over my adult decisions. They don't mean I have to include you in every aspect of my life to prove I'm grateful. I never asked for control. I asked to be included in my son's engagement party. And I explained why that wasn't possible. But you couldn't accept that explanation without making it about 25 years of ancient history and turning yourself into a victim. Ancient history? Marcus, that history is the reason you're sitting in a position to have this conversation. That history is why you have the education, the opportunities, the confidence to build the life you're so worried about protecting. And I'm grateful for that. But gratitude doesn't mean giving you veto power over my decisions for the rest of my life. Veto power? I didn't try to veto anything. I expressed that I was hurt by being excluded. You did more than express hurt, Mom. You questioned my character, accused me of being ashamed of you, suggested that I was betraying everything you taught me. That's not expressing hurt. That's emotional manipulation. I felt the ground shifting beneath me. Everything I thought I understood about our relationship, everything I believed about love and family and sacrifice, was being redefined by my son as manipulation and burden. So let me understand this clearly. I said, my voice barely steady. My working 3 jobs to support you was actually putting unfair pressure on you. My sacrificing so you could have opportunities was actually me failing to build my own life. My being hurt by your decision to exclude me is actually emotional manipulation. Is that what you're telling me? I'm telling you that love doesn't have to come with a price tag. I'm telling you that sacrifice doesn't create debt. I'm telling you that I can be grateful for what you did without owing you control over what I do. And I'm telling you that what I did came from love, not a desire for control. What I'm asking for comes from a desire to be part of your life, not to run it. But you can't separate the two. Every conversation we have comes back to what you did for me, what you gave up for me, how much you love me. It's like you're keeping a running tab of emotional debt that you expect me to pay forever. The accusation was so far from how I saw our relationship that I couldn't even formulate a response. In my mind, I was a mother who had loved her son unconditionally and was now being pushed out of his life. In his mind, I was apparently a manipulative woman who had used sacrifice as a weapon to maintain control. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Marcus, I said finally. Everything I did for you, I did out of love. Not to create debt, not to maintain control, but because that's what mothers do for their children. If you've interpreted that love as manipulation, then I failed you in ways I never imagined. Mom, I don't think you're a bad person. I just think you need to accept that I'm an adult with my own life, and that life doesn't revolve around managing your emotions. I never asked it to revolve around my emotions. I asked to be included, and I've explained why that's not always possible. We were talking in circles, each of us hearing something completely different in the other's words. I was hearing my son dismiss 35 years of love and sacrifice as emotional manipulation. He was hearing me demand control over decisions that weren't mine to make. Is there anything I could say or do that would change your mind about the engagement party? I asked quietly. Mom, the decision is made. The invitations have been sent. Cassandra's family has planned everything around a specific guest list. Even if I wanted to change things now, it would create chaos. So the answer is no. The answer is that this particular event isn't the right fit, but there will be other opportunities. Like what? Like the bachelor party dinner or the rehearsal? Dinner or family events that are more appropriate for family. You mean events where the Wellingtons won't be judging me? I mean events where everyone can be comfortable and relaxed instead of worried about social dynamics. There it was, the final confirmation that in my son's mind, I was the source of social discomfort, the person who made sophisticated people worried about dynamics. I understand, I said simply. Do you? Because I really need you to understand that this isn't about love or loyalty. It's about practical realities. I understand perfectly, Marcus. I understand that the woman who sacrificed everything for your success is now too embarrassing to be seen with the results of that success. Mom, please don't. I understand that in your new world, I'm a liability to be managed rather than a mother to be celebrated. That's not fair. And I understand that no amount of love or sacrifice or devotion can overcome the fact that I work at a diner and Cassandra's family has expectations. You're twisting everything I've said. No, Marcus. I'm finally hearing everything you've said. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the silence that had become my constant companion. But this time, the silence felt different. This time, it felt like clarity. My son had made his choice, and now it was time to make mine. The morning after my devastating conversation with Marcus, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For 3 decades, I had defined myself entirely, through my role as his mother. Every decision, every sacrifice, every dream deferred had been filtered through the question, what's best for Marcus? But lying in bed that Friday morning, staring at the water stain on my ceiling that I'd never had the money to fix, I realized that question had become a prison. I called in sick to Sunrise Diner for the first time in 8 years. Martha, the manager, was so shocked she asked if I needed her to drive me to the hospital. I assured her I was fine, just needed a day to handle some personal matters. That wasn't entirely untrue. I was about to handle the most personal matter of my life. My first stop was First National Bank of Riverside. I walked through those marble-floored halls in my discount store jeans and clearance rack sweater, past the professionally dressed customers in their business suits and designer handbags. 6 months ago, I would have felt intimidated, out of place, ashamed of my secondhand appearance. Today, I felt powerful in a way I'd never experienced. I'd like to speak with someone about making some significant financial arrangements, I told the receptionist. Certainly. Are you an existing customer? Yes. Eleanor Pemberton. I believe my account has been flagged for special services. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly as she looked at her computer screen. Within minutes, I was sitting in the office of Victoria Brennan, the bank's private wealth manager, discussing investment strategies and financial planning that would have been science fiction to me just weeks earlier. Mrs. Pemberton, with your recent windfall, you have some very interesting options available to you, Victoria explained, her tone respectful and professional. Have you given any thought to how you'd like to structure your new financial situation? I want to disappear, I said simply. Victoria looked confused. I'm sorry? I want to become someone completely different. I want to leave my old life behind and start over. What would that look like financially? For the next 2 hours, Victoria and I crafted a plan that felt like writing fiction. A new apartment in Willowbrook Heights, the upscale district across town. A complete wardrobe makeover with a personal shopping service. Investment accounts that would generate more income annually than I'd made in the past 5 years combined. And most importantly, complete discretion. No one from my old life would know about any of it unless I chose to tell them. I want to pay off my current lease and arrange for my belongings to be moved while I'm away, I told Victoria. And I want to arrange for a leave of absence from my jobs, paid leave for my replacements while I'm gone. How long of a leave are you thinking? 6 months, maybe longer. I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not busy being useful to people who don't appreciate me. Victoria smiled. Mrs. Pemberton, I think this is going to be a very interesting transformation. My next stop was Elegance Personal Shopping Services in downtown Riverside Heights. I'd seen their advertisements in magazines I could never afford to buy, featuring women my age who looked confident, sophisticated, and expensive. When I called to make an appointment, explaining that I needed a complete lifestyle makeover, they scheduled me for the following week. But I couldn't wait a week. I couldn't spend another 7 days looking in the mirror and seeing the woman my son was ashamed of. This is going to sound unusual, I told the consultant when I arrived unannounced, but I need to become a completely different person by Monday morning, and money is no object. 3 hours later, I walked out of that boutique wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than I used to make in 2 months, carrying shopping bags filled with clothes that actually fit my body instead of hiding it. My hair had been cut and styled by a professional who understood that gray could be elegant instead of dowdy. My makeup had been applied by an artist who showed me how to enhance features I'd forgotten I had. I looked in the mirror of the boutique's dressing room and saw a stranger, a confident, well-dressed woman who looked like she belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. But more than that, I saw a woman who looked like she mattered, like her opinions carried weight, like her presence was valued rather than tolerated. The transformation continued over the weekend. I signed the lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in Willowbrook Heights, complete with a doorman and a view of the city skyline. I arranged for professional movers to pack up my old life while I was gone. I booked a month-long luxury cruise through the Mediterranean, something I'd dreamed about for decades but never imagined I could afford. But the most important part of my transformation wasn't the clothes or the apartment or the trip. It was the phone call I made to my supervisor at Pinnacle Business Park, where I'd been cleaning offices for 15 years. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Eleanor Pemberton. I need to discuss my employment status." "Eleanor, you're one of our most reliable workers. Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect, actually. I'm calling to give my notice. Today is my last day." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Eleanor, are you sure? You've been with us for so long, and we really depend on you. Is this about money? Because we might be able to discuss a small raise." "It's not about money, it's about time. I'm 57 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years cleaning up other people's messes. I'm ready to stop doing that in every area of my life." "I don't understand. Did someone treat you poorly? Because if there's been an incident, we can address it." "No incident. I'm just choosing to value myself differently." After I hung up, I called Sunrise Diner and had an identical conversation with Martha. Then I called the tutoring service where I'd been working evenings. One by one, I systematically dismantled the architecture of obligation and necessity that had structured my life for decades. The most difficult call was to Mrs. Chen. Despite her recent betrayal, she had been a constant in my life for years, and I couldn't disappear without explanation. "Eleanor, dear, you sound different. Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful, Mrs. Chen. I'm calling to let you know that I'm going away for a while." "Going away? Where? For how long?" "I'm taking some time to travel and figure out what I want the next chapter of my life to look like." "But what? About your jobs? What about your responsibilities?" "I've quit my jobs. As for my responsibilities, I've spent 35 years being responsible for everyone else's happiness. I think it's time to try being responsible for my own." "Eleanor, this doesn't sound like you at all. Are you having some kind of crisis? Should I call Marcus?" "Please don't call Marcus. And no, I'm not having a crisis. I'm having a revelation. I'm realizing that the woman who raised a son to be ashamed of her might have been undervaluing herself for decades. Now, Eleanor, you know Marcus isn't ashamed of you. He's just trying to navigate a complicated social situation." "Mrs. Chen, Marcus uninvited me from his engagement party because he was embarrassed by my existence. You supported his decision. My own sister supported his decision. Everyone in my life has spent the past month explaining to me why I should accept being treated as a second-class member of my own family. I'm done accepting that. But where will you go? What will you do?" "I'm going to see the world. I'm going to eat food I've never tried and visit places I've only seen in magazines. I'm going to discover who Eleanor Pemberton is when she's not busy being Marcus Torres's embarrassing mother." The conversation ended with Mrs. Chen expressing concern about my sudden personality change and suggesting that I should think carefully before making any rash decisions. I assured her that I'd never thought more clearly in my life. My final task was the most symbolic. I drove to Paulson's corner store, where I'd bought lottery tickets faithfully for 22 years. Mr. Paulson greeted me with his usual friendly smile. "Evening, Eleanor. The usual tickets tonight?" "Actually, no. I'm done with the lottery, Mr. Paulson. Turns out I already won." He looked confused, but I just smiled and left. I would never need to dream about a different life again, because I was about to start living one. That Sunday night, I sat in my old apartment for the last time, surrounded by boxes and the echoes of 35 years of sacrifice. I thought about the woman who had moved into this neighborhood with a 3-month-old baby and $73, determined to give her son everything she'd never had. That woman had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. Her son was educated, successful, and financially secure. But somewhere along the way, that woman had forgotten to save anything for herself. She'd given away her dreams, her identity, her sense of worth, believing that a mother's love required complete self-sacrifice. Tomorrow, I would become someone different. Someone who mattered not because of what she could do for others, but because of who she was. Someone who commanded respect, not through service, but through presence. I had no idea if Marcus would even notice I was gone. But for the first time, in my adult life, that didn't matter. I was finally ready to find out who Eleanor Pemberton could be when she lived for herself. The first week of my disappearance passed quietly. I was aboard the Serenity of the Seas, watching the coastline of Spain fade into the distance when my phone began buzzing with increasingly frantic messages. I deliberately waited until I was in international waters to check them, knowing that distance would make it easier to resist the familiar pull of guilt and obligation. The first message was from Martha at Sunrise Diner. Eleanor, your replacement. Called in sick and we're swamped. Can you come in just for today? I know you quit, but we really need you. The second was from Mrs. Rodriguez at Pinnacle Business Park. Eleanor, the new cleaning crew missed half the offices last night. Mr. Davidson is furious. Could you please come in and fix this mess? We'll pay you double overtime. But it was Marcus's messages that revealed the true scope of what was happening in my absence. The first one came 3 days after I'd left. Mom, I stopped by your apartment. And Mrs. Chen said you moved out? Call me back. This is ridiculous. By day 5, his tone had shifted dramatically. Mom, where the hell are you? Your landlord said you paid to break your lease and left no forwarding address. Mrs. Chen is worried. Sick. I'm worried sick. This isn't like you at all. By day 7, desperation had crept into his voice. Mom, please call me back. I know we had a fight, but disappearing isn't the answer. Cassandra is asking questions I can't answer. People are starting to talk. I need to know you're okay. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But it was the message from Trevor Blackwood that truly revealed how my absence was being perceived by Marcus's circle. Mrs. Pemberton, this is Trevor. Marcus asked me to reach out. He's really concerned about you, and frankly, so am I. Disappearing like this seems like a cry for help. Maybe you should consider speaking with a professional about healthy ways to process rejection. Marcus told me about your reaction to the engagement party situation. And this kind of extreme behavior is concerning. Please call someone back so we know you're safe. I saved that particular message. The patronizing tone, the assumption that my choice to leave was somehow pathological, the suggestion that I needed professional help to process rejection. It was exactly the kind of condescension I'd been subjected to my entire adult life, and it crystallized why leaving had been the right decision. The messages from Janet were predictably self-righteous. Eleanor, what you're doing is cruel and manipulative. Marcus is beside himself with worry, and you're putting everyone who cares about you through hell just to make a point. This is exactly the kind of dramatic behavior that made his decision about the engagement party necessary in the first place. Grow up and come home. But it was Mrs. Chen's voicemail that provided the most interesting insight into how my disappearance was being interpreted. Eleanor, dear, I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I'm very worried about your state of mind. This sudden personality change, quitting your jobs, moving out without telling anyone. These are classic signs of a psychological break. Marcus thinks you might be having some kind of delayed reaction to being a single mother for so long, like empty nest syndrome, but more severe. Please call me back so we can help you get the support you need. Empty nest syndrome. A psychological break. These were the explanations my family and friends had constructed to make sense of my transformation. It was easier for them to believe I was mentally unstable than to consider that I might simply have decided to stop accepting unacceptable treatment. The real revelation came in a 3-way call I received on day 10, when Marcus, Janet, and Mrs. Chen attempted an intervention by phone. I was sitting on the deck of the cruise ship, watching dolphins play in the Mediterranean sunset, when my phone rang with Marcus's number. Mom, thank God. I have Janet and Mrs. Chen here with me. We've been so worried. Hello, Eleanor. Janet's voice cut in immediately. We need to talk about what you're doing to this family. Eleanor, dear, Mrs. Chen added, we're all here because we love you, and we're concerned about these erratic decisions you've been making. I took a sip of my champagne, a bottle that cost more than I used to make in a week, and listened as they staged their intervention. Mom, this has gone on long enough, Marcus began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he probably used with subordinates at work. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Now it's time to come home and act like an adult. Actually, I said calmly, I'm acting like an adult for the first time in 35 years. I'm making decisions based on what I want rather than what other people need from me. What you want? Janet's voice was sharp with disapproval. Eleanor, you have responsibilities. You have people who depend on you. You can't just run away because your feelings got hurt. My feelings didn't get hurt, Janet. My eyes got opened. There's a difference. Mom, listen to yourself, Marcus interrupted. You're talking like a completely different person. This isn't you. The mother I know would never abandon her family like this. The mother you know was a woman who worked herself to death so you could have opportunities to grow up and be embarrassed by her. Maybe it's time you met the woman I actually am. This is exactly what we're talking about, Mrs. Chen interjected, gently. Eleanor, this bitter, angry person isn't who you really are. You're a loving, nurturing woman who's always put family first. This selfishness isn't like you at all. You're right, I agreed. Selfishness isn't like me at all. I've spent 35 years being completely selfless. I'm discovering that being selfish occasionally is actually quite liberating. Liberating? Marcus's voice rose. Mom, do you know what people are saying? Do you know how this looks? My mother disappears right before my engagement party. Leaves. No forwarding address. Quits all her jobs. It looks like you had some kind of breakdown. And why does how it looks matter to you, Marcus? I thought I was too embarrassing to be seen with anyway. That's not... You're twisting what I said. I never said you were embarrassing. You said I wasn't suitable for your engagement party because I work at a diner and don't understand sophisticated social situations. What would you call that? I call it being realistic about social dynamics, and I call it being ashamed of your mother. But the good news is, you don't have to worry about social dynamics anymore. I won't be attending any of your events, sophisticated or otherwise. The three-way conversation continued for another 45 minutes, with each of them taking turns trying different approaches. Janet tried guilt. Eleanor, what would your mother think of this behavior? Mrs. Chen tried concern. Eleanor, we're worried about your mental health. Marcus tried authority. Mom, this tantrum has gone on long enough. But what struck me most was how none of them asked about my well-being. No one said, are you happy? Are you enjoying yourself? What have you been doing? Their only concern was how my absence affected them and how quickly they could convince me to return to my old role. I have one question for all of you, I said finally. In the past 10 days, has anyone asked whether I might actually be better off without you? Has anyone considered that maybe I'm happier now than I've been in decades? Has anyone wondered if this isn't a breakdown, but a breakthrough? The silence that followed was deafening. Mom, Marcus said finally, you're our family. We want you to come home. No, Marcus. You want me to come back and resume being useful. You want me to go back to my diner job and my tiny apartment and my role as the grateful mother who's just happy to be included when convenient. You want me to stop embarrassing you by having expectations of my own. That's not true. Then prove it. Tell me what you know about what I've been doing for the past 10 days. Tell me what you've imagined about my new life. Show me that you've thought about me as a person rather than as a problem to be solved. Another silence. We assumed you were staying at some cheap hotel somewhere, probably running out of money, Janet said hesitantly. We thought you might be having trouble taking care of yourself, Mrs. Chen added. We were worried about you being alone with no support system. Marcus's voice was smaller when he spoke. I thought you were somewhere feeling sorry for yourself, trying to make us feel guilty for the engagement party thing. I laughed, a sound so genuinely amused that it seemed to shock them. You thought I was in some fleabag motel eating takeout and crying about being uninvited to a party. That's what you know about who I am and what I'm capable of. Then tell us where you are, Marcus demanded. Tell us what you're doing. Living, Marcus. For the first time in my adult life, I'm actually living instead of just surviving. And I'm discovering that I'm much more interesting than any of you ever imagined. The call ended with them demanding I return immediately and me promising to consider their request. But as I hung up and returned to watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean in shades of gold and crimson, I knew I would never go back to being the woman they missed. That woman had been useful, grateful, and invisible. This woman was powerful, independent, and free. The contrast was too stark to ever ignore again. The transformation began in earnest during my second week aboard the Serenity of the Seas. After that disastrous three-way intervention call, I turned off my phone completely and committed myself to discovering who Eleanor Pemberton could be when she wasn't defined by other people's needs. My first revelation came at the ship's cooking class, led by Chef Antonio Rossetti, a warm Italian man in his 60s who treated cooking like an art form rather than a chore. I'd signed up on impulse, thinking it might be a pleasant way to pass an afternoon. I expected to learn a few simple recipes, maybe pick up some tips for preparing meals more efficiently. Instead, I discovered I had a gift. Signora Eleanor, Chef Antonio said after tasting the osso buco I'd prepared. Where did you learn to cook like this? I didn't learn anywhere special, I replied, surprised by his enthusiasm. I just cooked what I could afford for 35 years, trying to make cheap ingredients taste good. But this is exactly what makes a true chef, he exclaimed. Anyone can make expensive ingredients taste good. But to take humble ingredients and transform them into something magnificent, this is art. For the next week, I spent every morning in Chef Antonio's kitchen, learning techniques I'd never imagined, and discovering that my years of making miracles happen with limited resources had actually given me an intuitive understanding of flavor, texture, and creativity that impressed even the professional staff. You should consider culinary school when you return home, Chef Antonio told me on my final day in his kitchen. I teach at the International Culinary Institute in Rome. I would be honored to recommend you for our advanced program. I'm 57 years old, I laughed. Isn't it a bit late to start a new career? Signora, Julia Child was 50 when she learned to cook properly. Age is not a barrier to excellence, only to excuses. The idea of culinary school seemed absurd, but it planted a seed I couldn't ignore. For the first time in decades, someone was suggesting I had talents worth developing professionally, not just skills useful for taking care of others. My second revelation came in the ship's art studio, where I'd wandered one afternoon while avoiding the pool deck. Too many families with teenagers who reminded me of Marcus at that age. The instructor, a sophisticated woman named Vivienne Laurent, was teaching watercolor landscape painting to a small group of passengers. I've never painted anything before, I told her hesitantly. I'm probably too old to start. Nonsense, Vivienne replied in her crisp French accent. Some of the greatest artists didn't begin until later in life. Sit down and let's see what you can do. 3 hours later, I was staring at a painting of the Mediterranean coastline that somehow captured not just the colors and shapes I could see, but the feeling of freedom I was experiencing for the first time in my adult life. The other students gathered around my easel, murmuring appreciatively about my natural eye for composition and intuitive color sense. You have real talent, Vivienne told me privately after the class. This isn't beginner's luck. You have an artist's way of seeing the world. Have you ever considered taking formal instruction? I hadn't. In my old life, art was something other people did. People with time and money and lives that allowed for such luxuries. But looking at my painting, actually seeing something beautiful that I had created with my own hands, I felt a stirring of possibility I'd forgotten existed. The most profound revelation came through my friendship with Margaret Whitfield, a 72-year-old widow from Boston, who had become my constant companion during shore excursions. Margaret was everything I'd never imagined I could be: confident, well-traveled, financially independent, and utterly comfortable taking up space in the world. "I married my college sweetheart at 22, she told me over dinner in Barcelona. Spent 47 years as Robert's wife, defining myself entirely through his career and our children's achievements. When he died 3 years ago, I realized I had no idea who Margaret was when she wasn't busy being useful to someone else." "That sounds familiar," I said, thinking of my own complete identity absorption into Marcus's life. "The difference is, I decided to find out. I sold the house that was too big for one person, bought a condo near the harbor, and started saying yes to every opportunity that scared me. This is my 5th cruise in 2 years. Next month, I'm starting photography classes. In the fall, I'm volunteering with a literacy program in Guatemala. Aren't you worried about, I don't know, starting over so late in life?" Margaret laughed, a sound full of joy and mischief. "Eleanor, I spent 50 years being the person everyone else needed me to be. If I spend the next 20 years being who I want to be, I'll still come out ahead." Through Margaret, I met other women on the ship who were experiencing their own late-life awakenings. There was Patricia, a former nurse who had started her own consulting business at 68. Carmen, a grandmother who had learned to speak Spanish and moved to Costa Rica to teach English. Linda, who had gotten her pilot's license at 70 and now flew medical supplies to remote communities. These women became my informal mentors, showing me that reinvention wasn't just possible but necessary. They shared stories of family members who had initially been shocked, concerned, or even hostile about their transformations, but who had eventually learned to respect the women they'd become. "The hardest part," Patricia told me over wine on the deck of the ship, "is that the people who benefited from your old life will try to convince you that changing is selfish, dangerous, or unrealistic. They'll tell you that you're having a breakdown, that you're not thinking clearly, that you're abandoning your responsibilities." "That's exactly what my family is saying," I admitted. "Of course they are. Your old life was convenient for them. They had someone who always said yes, who never made demands, who existed primarily to make their lives easier. Your new life threatens that arrangement." Carmen nodded emphatically. "My son told me I was having a midlife crisis at 70. My daughter insisted I was being reckless and irresponsible. They couldn't understand that I wasn't running away from something. I was running toward myself." "How did you handle their resistance?" "I stopped trying to convince them and started showing them. I stopped explaining my choices and started enjoying the results of those choices. Eventually, they either accepted the new me or they didn't. But I refused to go back to being someone I'd outgrown just to make them comfortable." These conversations gave me language for what I was experiencing and courage for what I was becoming. I wasn't having a breakdown. I was having a breakthrough. I wasn't abandoning my responsibilities. I was redefining what I was responsible for. I wasn't running away from my life. I was running toward a life that actually belonged to me. By the time we docked in Rome, I had made 3 major decisions. First, I was going to extend my trip indefinitely. Second, I was going to seriously explore both culinary school and art classes when I returned to the States. Third, I was going to stop explaining myself to people who had already decided that my happiness was less important than their convenience. But perhaps most importantly, I had discovered something that shocked me. I was interesting. Not just useful, not just helpful, not just necessary, but actually interesting. I had opinions about art, insights about cooking, stories about my travels that made people laugh and ask questions. I had thoughts about politics, preferences, about wine, and perspectives on life that other people valued. For 35 years, I had been Marcus's mother, first and foremost, and sometimes exclusively. Now I was Eleanor, traveler, cook, artist, friend, woman of means and mystery. The contrast was so stark it was almost laughable. The woman who had been too embarrassing for her son's engagement party was now the center of attention at dinner. Tables across the Mediterranean, regaling fellow travelers with stories of her adventures and insights from her journey of self-discovery. The woman who had been told she needed to know her place was now confidently making reservations at the finest restaurants in Europe, speaking with sommeliers about wine pairings, and planning itineraries for future trips to places she'd only dreamed of visiting. The woman who had been dismissed as emotionally unstable for wanting to be included in her son's life was now calmly declining phone calls from family members, who suddenly seemed very interested in her whereabouts and activities. As my ship pulled into the port of Rome, I stood on the deck watching the ancient city spread out before me, and I realized something profound. The person my family missed wasn't gone. She had simply never existed. They missed their version of me, the woman who had existed primarily to serve their needs and make their lives easier. But the real Eleanor Pemberton, the woman I was discovering myself to be, was far more interesting than any of them had ever imagined, and I was just getting started. While I was discovering myself in the Mediterranean, the carefully constructed world Marcus had built was beginning to crumble in ways that had nothing to do with my absence, though my disappearance had certainly accelerated the process. I learned about the first crack in his perfect facade from an unexpected source, Cassandra herself. 3 weeks into my trip, as I was exploring the art galleries of Florence with Margaret, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Mrs. Pemberton, this is Cassandra Wellington. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Marcus's phone." Her voice was strained, lacking the polished confidence I remembered from our few previous interactions. "I'm calling because I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding about the engagement party situation, and I wanted to speak with you directly." "Oh?" I settled into a cafe chair, curious about what Marcus's fiancée might have to say. "The truth is, Mrs. Pemberton, I never asked Marcus to exclude you from the party. In fact, when he told me you weren't coming, I was surprised. I've been looking forward to getting to know you better." This was interesting. "What exactly did Marcus tell you about why I wouldn't be attending?" "He said you had decided not to come because you felt the event was too formal, and you'd be more comfortable at smaller, family-oriented celebrations. He made it sound like it was your choice." I nearly laughed at the elegant way Marcus had rewritten history. "That's not quite how I remember the conversation. I'm beginning to suspect as much. Mrs. Pemberton, can I be completely honest with you? Please do. Marcus has been acting very strangely since you went away. He's distracted at work, snapping at people, constantly checking his phone. Yesterday, I found him going through old photo albums, looking at pictures of you, too, from when he was younger. When I asked him about it, he got defensive and said I wouldn't understand because I'd never had to worry about money. That sounds like Marcus. But here's what's really concerning me. I've started noticing things about how he talks about people. His colleagues at work, service staff at restaurants, even my family's household employees. There's this condescension that I hadn't picked up on before, as if he's constantly evaluating whether people are worthy of his respect based on their social status. I found myself genuinely surprised by Cassandra's perceptiveness. I dismissed her as another privileged society princess, but she was clearly more observant than I'd given her credit for. "Last week," she continued, "we were at dinner with my parents, and Marcus made a comment about how some people don't understand that upward mobility requires leaving certain aspects of your past behind. My father asked what he meant, and Marcus actually said that sometimes family members can become obstacles to professional advancement if they can't adapt to new social expectations." "He said that in front of your parents?" "In front of my parents, my uncle, who's a federal judge, and my godfather, who sits on the board of Marcus's company. Mrs. Pemberton, the men in my family didn't get where they are by abandoning the people who helped them succeed. They were appalled. I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. What did they say? My father asked Marcus to clarify whether he was talking about his own family. When Marcus said that his mother was a lovely woman but not really suited for certain professional environments, my father excused himself from the table. He told me later that any man who talks about his mother that way is probably not someone who understands loyalty or gratitude. The irony was delicious. Marcus had excluded me from his engagement party to make a good impression on the Wellingtons, only to destroy that impression by revealing exactly the kind of man he'd become. Mrs. Pemberton, I need to ask you something directly. Did Marcus uninvite you from the engagement party because he was embarrassed by you? He explained that I wasn't sophisticated enough for your family's expectations and that my presence would create awkward social dynamics. The silence on Cassandra's end stretched for several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was tight with controlled anger. That son of a bitch. Cassandra, no, excuse me, but that's exactly what he is. Mrs. Pemberton, my family may have money, but we didn't get it by forgetting where we came from. My great-grandfather was a steel worker who saved every penny to send my grandfather to college. My grandmother cleaned houses to help pay for my father's law school. We honor our family's sacrifices. We don't hide from them. I appreciate that, Cassandra, but my father specifically asked to meet you because Marcus had mentioned how hard you worked to put him through college. Daddy respects that kind of dedication. He was looking forward to thanking you personally for raising such a successful young man. Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of Marcus's carefully constructed narrative. He hadn't just excluded me to protect the Wellington sensibilities. He'd excluded me to protect himself from having to acknowledge his origins in front of people who would have actually respected my story. There's something else, Cassandra continued. The engagement party is this Saturday, and honestly, I'm having serious doubts about the entire relationship. Watching Marcus these past few weeks, seeing how he talks about family loyalty, observing how he treats people he considers beneath him. Mrs. Pemberton, is this who your son really is? The question hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to defend Marcus, to explain that he'd been different once, that the pressure of social climbing had changed him. But sitting in a Florentine cafe, surrounded by art and beauty and my own newfound freedom, I found I couldn't summon the energy to make excuses for him anymore. I don't know who Marcus really is anymore, Cassandra. I thought I raised him to value kindness and loyalty and gratitude. But the man who uninvited his mother from his engagement party because she wasn't classy enough, that's not someone I recognize. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Pemberton. I had no idea he had treated you that way. It's not your fault, dear. And honestly, his decision to exclude me turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. What do you mean? I mean, I'm sitting in Florence right now, drinking wine and planning my next adventure, discovering talents I never knew I had, and meeting fascinating people who actually appreciate my company. If Marcus hadn't made me feel so unwelcome in his life, I never would have discovered how much more interesting my own life could be. You're in Florence, Mrs. Pemberton. That's wonderful. Are you enjoying Italy? We spent the next 20 minutes talking about my travels, my cooking classes, my art lessons, and my plans to extend my trip indefinitely. Cassandra seemed genuinely delighted by my adventures, asking thoughtful questions and expressing genuine admiration for my courage in starting over. Mrs. Pemberton, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you think Marcus would be capable of learning from this? Do you think he could change? Become the kind of man who deserves the sacrifices you made for him? I considered the question carefully. I think Marcus would be capable of change if he wanted to change, but change requires admitting you were wrong. And Marcus has become very comfortable being right about everything. I see. Cassandra, can I give you some advice from an older woman who spent too many years trying to fix people who didn't want to be fixed? Please. Don't marry someone hoping they'll become who you want them to be. Marry them for who they are right now, today, or don't marry them at all. And if the man you're engaged to is someone who would abandon his mother to impress his in-laws, ask yourself what he'll abandon to advance his career, or gain social status, or simply make his life more convenient. The call ended with Cassandra thanking me for my honesty and promising to do some serious thinking about her future with Marcus. As I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and satisfaction. Sadness that my son had become someone capable of losing a woman like Cassandra through his own arrogance and shallow priorities. Satisfaction that his carefully constructed new life was unraveling because of his own choices, not because of anything I had done or failed to do. But the real satisfaction came from something else entirely. For the first time in my adult life, I was learning about my son's problems without feeling responsible for fixing them. Marcus's world was crumbling, but it wasn't my job to catch the pieces anymore. I was too busy building my own life to worry about cleaning up the mess he'd made of his. 6 weeks into my European adventure, the desperate calls began. Not the concerned family interventions or the worried friend check-ins, but the panicked, pleading messages of a man whose carefully constructed world had completely collapsed. I was in a charming bistro in Provence, sketching the lavender fields. I'd painted that morning when my phone erupted with a series of increasingly frantic voicemails from Marcus. I'd been selectively answering calls from unknown numbers. Some of my new artist friends from various cities had been reaching out, but I'd kept Marcus's number blocked. However, he'd started calling from different phones. The first message came from what I later learned was Trevor's phone. "Mom, it's Marcus. Please, I know you're getting these messages. I need to talk to you. Something terrible has happened." Cassandra called off the engagement. The wedding is canceled. Everything is falling apart, and I need my mother. I almost deleted it without listening to the rest. But something in his voice, a vulnerability I hadn't heard since he was a child, made me continue. The second message came an hour later from an unfamiliar number. "Mom, please. I know I was wrong about the engagement party. I know I hurt you. Cassandra told me about your conversation. She said things. She made me realize how badly I've treated you. I want to make this right. I want to apologize properly. Please call me back." The third message arrived that evening, this time from Janet's phone. "Mom, it's not just Cassandra. Work found out about the engagement cancellation, and there are rumors about why it happened. Mr. Wellington sits on our board, and apparently Cassandra told her father some things about how I talk about family. My career is in jeopardy. I don't know what to do. I need your advice. I need you." I saved all the messages but didn't respond. Instead, I called Margaret, who had become my unofficial life coach during our travels together. "Eleanor, darling, you sound conflicted," Margaret observed after I'd filled her in on Marcus's situation. "I am conflicted. Part of me wants to help him. He's still my son. But part of me remembers that 6 weeks ago, he was telling people I was having a psychological breakdown for being hurt by his treatment. What does your gut tell you?" "My gut tells me this is exactly what I was afraid would happen if I went back to my old life. The moment he needs something from me, I'll become important again. The moment the crisis passes, I'll go back to being the embarrassing mother he manages from a distance. So, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish my trip. And then, I'm going to make him wait." But Marcus wasn't willing to wait. The calls escalated in frequency and desperation. By the end of the week, he was calling multiple times a day from different numbers, leaving increasingly revealing messages about just how completely his life had unraveled. "Mom, Trevor won't even talk to me anymore. He says my family issues are affecting my professional reputation. Mrs. Chen told Janet that she thinks I'm a disgrace for driving you away. Half the people at work are looking at me like I'm some kind of monster. I don't understand how everything went so wrong so fast. Mom, I had to move back into the old apartment. I can't afford the place Cassandra and I were going to share. And the deposit on the reception venue was non-refundable. I'm drowning in debt from a wedding that's never going to happen. I need to talk to someone who understands financial pressure. I need to talk to you. Mom, I know you're in Europe somewhere. Mrs. Chen saw pictures on Janet's Facebook that Janet said you posted. You look happy. You look different. I don't understand how you can be happy when your family is falling apart, when I'm falling apart. That last message made me angry enough to finally respond, though not in the way he expected. Instead of calling him back, I posted a photo on my social media accounts I'd never used much before but had become active on during my travels. The photo showed me at a cooking class in Lyon, laughing with Chef Antoine as I presented. A perfect coq au vin to my fellow students. I was wearing a beautiful dress I'd bought in Rome. My hair was professionally styled, and I looked radiant. The caption read, "Discovering that I have a real talent for French cuisine. Who knew that?" 35 years of making miracles happen with limited ingredients was actually training for culinary artistry. Life is full of wonderful surprises when you open yourself to new possibilities. Within hours, my phone was ringing off the hook. Not just Marcus, but Janet, Mrs. Chen, even some of Marcus's colleagues who had somehow found my social media accounts. The woman they'd all been worried about, the one having a breakdown, struggling alone in some cheap hotel, was clearly thriving in ways none of them had imagined. Marcus's next message revealed just how much my social media post had shaken him. "Mom, I saw your pictures. You look incredible. I don't understand. How are you doing all this? How are you affording cooking classes in France? How do you look so happy when you've been gone for over a month with no job? I'm so confused. Please call me. I need to understand what's happening." I almost laughed at his confusion. It had never occurred to him to wonder how I was funding my extended European vacation. In his mind, I was still the struggling single mother living paycheck to paycheck, scraping together money for life's basic necessities. The idea that I might have resources he didn't know about was clearly beyond his comprehension. But it was his final message that convinced me it was time to start heading home. Not to rescue him, but to finish what I'd started. "Mom, I went to your old apartment today. I don't know why. I guess I wanted to see if there were any clues about where you went or when you might come back. The new tenant let me look around, and it was so strange seeing someone else's furniture in the rooms where I grew up. I kept thinking about all the meals you cooked in that tiny kitchen, all the times you helped me with homework at that old table, all the sacrifices you made in that little space. I think I've been trying so hard to forget where I came from that I forgot to appreciate the person who made it possible for me to leave. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Please come home. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." For the first time since leaving, I felt something soften in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition of genuine remorse. Marcus was finally beginning to understand what he'd lost. Not just his fiancée or his professional standing, but the foundation of love and sacrifice that had made his entire life possible. But understanding what you've lost and deserving to get it back are two very different things. Decided it was time to go home and see if my son was truly ready to meet the woman I'd become, or if he was simply desperate to retrieve the mother he'd taken for granted. The difference would determine everything about our future relationship. 3. Days later, I boarded a plane from Paris to Willowbrook, wearing a designer outfit that cost more than my old monthly rent and carrying myself with a confidence I'd never possessed before. I had extended my trip for 2 months, learned to cook like a professional chef, discovered I had genuine artistic talent, and made friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I could do for them. I was returning not as the desperate, heartbroken mother who had left, but as Eleanor Pemberton, woman of mystery and means, world traveler, artist, and chef. Whether Marcus was ready to meet this version of his mother remained to be seen, but I was finally ready to find out. I returned to Willowbrook on a Tuesday morning in late September, 3 months after I'd disappeared from my old life. The woman who stepped off the plane at Millfield Regional Airport bore little resemblance to the one who had left. My hair was professionally styled in an elegant silver bob that caught the light beautifully. I wore a tailored navy blazer and silk blouse that moved with confidence I'd never possessed before. My luggage was expensive leather, and I carried myself like someone who belonged in first-class lounges and five-star hotels, because now, I did. I had deliberately not told anyone I was coming home. After 3 months of frantic messages, desperate voicemails, and increasingly pitiful attempts to reach me, I wanted to control this reunion completely. My first stop was the Riverside Heights Luxury Suites, where I'd reserved the penthouse for an indefinite stay. As I checked in, the concierge handed me a bottle of champagne and a welcome basket, addressing me as Ms. Pemberton, with the kind of deference I'd never experienced in my old life. Money, I had learned, was indeed the great equalizer. From my suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see across the city to Millfield Creek, where my old life had played out in that tiny apartment above Henderson's bakery. The distance felt symbolic, not just geographical, but emotional and spiritual as well. I spent my first day back settling into my new temporary home and making plans. I called Victoria at the bank to arrange for the transfer of funds to set up my new life permanently. I contacted a real estate agent about purchasing a home in Willowbrook Heights. I researched local art studios and cooking schools, ready to continue the education I'd begun in Europe. But most importantly, I prepared myself mentally for the conversation I knew was coming. On my second day back, I did something I knew would force Marcus's hand. I made a very public appearance at the place where our story had begun. Henderson's bakery had changed hands since my departure, but it was still a gathering spot for longtime Millfield Creek residents. I walked in wearing a designer dress and ordered coffee and pastries with the casual confidence of someone comfortable spending money on small luxuries. Within 30 minutes, Mrs. Chen appeared, drawn by phone calls from at least 3 neighbors, who had spotted me. "Eleanor," she gasped, barely recognizing the transformed woman before her. "My goodness, you look. I look happy," I finished for her, settling into a window booth with my coffee. "Please, sit down, Mrs. Chen. I've missed our talks." She sat across from me, studying my face with undisguised amazement. "Eleanor, what happened to you? You look 10 years younger. You look like a completely different person." I became a completely different person. It turns out, when you stop defining yourself through other people's needs, you discover capabilities you never knew you had. But how? I mean, we were all so worried about you. We thought you were struggling somewhere, maybe even homeless. Marcus has been beside himself with worry. Has he? I sipped my coffee calmly. Funny how his worry didn't extend to calling me directly until his own life started falling apart. Mrs. Chen's expression shifted uncomfortably. "Eleanor, we all made mistakes. Marcus knows he handled the engagement party situation poorly. But disappearing for 3 months without a word, that was cruel. Was it crueler than uninviting your mother from your engagement party because she's too embarrassing for your new social circle? You know about Cassandra calling off the wedding? I know about a lot of things, Mrs. Chen. I know that Marcus told his fiancé's family that his mother was a lovely woman, but not really suited for certain professional environments. I know that he blamed me for being dramatic when I was hurt by his rejection. I know that everyone in my life lined up to explain why I should accept being treated as a second-class member of my own family." Mrs. Chen's face flushed with embarrassment. "Eleanor, we were trying to help Marcus navigate a difficult situation." "No, Mrs. Chen, You are trying to help Marcus avoid the consequences of his choices. There's a difference. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. Word of my appearance had clearly reached Marcus. Mom, Mrs. Chen said you're back and you're at Henderson's. I'm coming over right now. Please don't leave before I get there. I showed Mrs. Chen the message. It seems my son has finally decided. He's ready to have a conversation. Eleanor, please be gentle with him. He's been through so much these past few months. So have I, Mrs. Chen. The difference is, I've been through it by choice, discovering who I really am. He's been through it as a consequence of his own actions. Marcus burst through the bakery door 15 minutes later, his eyes scanning the room frantically until they found me. When he saw me, he stopped dead in his tracks, his mouth falling open in shock. The son who had been embarrassed by his working-class mother was staring at a woman who looked like she belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. My transformation was so complete that for a moment he seemed unsure it was really me. Mom? He whispered, approaching the table cautiously. Hello, Marcus? He slid into the booth across from me, his eyes taking in every detail of my appearance. You look incredible. I mean, you look like a completely different person. I am a completely different person. How? I mean, where have you been? How? Have you been able to afford all this? He gestured vaguely at my outfit, my hair, the expensive watch I now wore. I smiled, the same calm smile I'd perfected during my months of self-discovery. Marcus, there are quite a few things about your mother that you never bothered to learn. What do you mean? I mean that the woman you were embarrassed to introduce to the Wellingtons is worth $18 million. The silence that followed was so complete that every conversation in the bakery seemed to pause. Marcus stared at me with an expression of pure shock, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. $18 million? He finally managed. $18,473,000 to be precise. I won the lottery 3 weeks before your engagement party. The same engagement party you uninvited me from because I wasn't sophisticated enough for your new life. Marcus's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, confusion, realization, and finally, a deep, profound shame that I'd never seen before. You were rich when I said all those things about you not being suitable for. When you told me I was too embarrassing for the Wellingtons. Yes. When you explained that my working-class background would make sophisticated people uncomfortable? Yes. When you suggested I stay home because I didn't understand social dynamics? Yes, Marcus. I was worth more money than anyone at that party could imagine, and you still decided I wasn't good enough to be seen with the son I'd sacrificed everything to raise. The color drained from his face completely. Mom, I had no idea. If you had known, what? You would have treated me with respect? You would have been proud of the woman who raised you? Marcus, listen to yourself. You're saying you would have valued me differently if you'd known about my money. What does that tell you about the man you've become? He buried his face in his hands. I've been such a fool. Yes, you have. But here's what I learned during my 3 months in Europe, Marcus. I don't need your validation anymore. For 35 years, I lived for your approval, your success, your happiness. I worked 3 jobs and sold everything I owned and went without meals so you could have opportunities. And the moment you succeeded, you decided I was an embarrassment to be managed. Mom, please, I want to make this right. Do you? Or do you want access to the lifestyle my money could provide? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Marcus looked up from his hands, tears streaming down his face, and for the first time in our conversation, I saw genuine understanding in his eyes. I deserve that question, he said quietly. And honestly, I don't know how to prove to you that. It's not about the money. How do I prove that I've learned something? How do I show you that losing Cassandra, losing respect at work, watching my life fall apart, How do I prove that it taught me what really matters? You don't prove it to me, Marcus. You prove it to yourself. You figure out who you want to be when no one is watching, when there's nothing to gain from being decent. You decide whether you want to be the kind of man who values people based on their usefulness to him, or the kind who remembers where he came from and honors the people who helped him get where he is. And what about us? What about our relationship? I finished my coffee and stood up, gathering my purse with the same confidence I'd learned to carry myself. Our relationship will be whatever you make it, Marcus, but it will be on my terms now, not yours. I'm not the desperate single mother who needed your success to validate her sacrifices anymore. I'm Eleanor Pemberton, successful, independent, and worth $18 million. If you want a relationship with this version of your mother, you'll need to earn it. How do I do that? You start by figuring out how to apologize to a woman you can't condescend to anymore. You figure out how to build a relationship with someone who doesn't need anything from you. And you learn to love people for who they are, not what they can do for your image. I left him sitting in that booth, staring after me with the dawning realization that the woman he'd taken for granted was gone forever. Whether he was capable of building a relationship with the woman I'd become remained to be seen. But for the first time in my adult life, I didn't care about the outcome more than I cared about my own self-respect. I had finally learned the difference between being loved and being needed, and I would never settle for less than both again. 6 months later, Marcus and I meet for dinner once a month at restaurants of my choosing. He pays, not because I need him to, but because he insists as his way of acknowledging what I spent on him for 35 years. He asks about my art classes, my cooking lessons, my travel plans. He listens to my stories and laughs at my jokes and treats me like an interesting person whose company he values. It's not the relationship we used to have. It's infinitely better. Because now, when Marcus tells people about his mother, he doesn't mention my old jobs or my modest background. He tells them about the woman who won $18 million and decided to see the world, learn to paint, and discover who she really was. He tells them about Eleanor Pemberton, the most interesting woman he knows. And finally, after all these years, he's absolutely right. 2 years after my transformation, I was standing in the kitchen of my newly opened restaurant, Eleanor's Table, putting the finishing touches on that evening's special, when Marcus walked through the back door with a nervous expression and a young woman I'd never met. "Mom, I hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced. I wanted you to meet someone." I looked up from the coq au vin I was plating, the same dish I'd perfected in Lyon, and smiled at the petite brunette standing slightly behind my son. She was pretty in an understated way, wearing a simple dress and carrying herself with genuine warmth rather than calculated sophistication. "You must be the famous Eleanor," she said, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "I'm Sarah Chen. No. Relation to Mrs. Chen," she added with a laugh. "Marcus talks about you constantly. I was beginning to think you were too good to be true." I liked her immediately. There was something refreshingly honest about Sarah, a lack of pretense that reminded me of the woman I'd become rather than the woman I'd once been. "Sarah's a social worker," Marcus said, and I caught the pride in his voice, not the calculated pride of someone showing off a trophy, but genuine admiration. "She runs programs for single mothers in downtown Millfield. We met when I started volunteering there." "Volunteering?" I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. Marcus had the grace to look embarrassed. "I know it sounds strange coming from me, but after everything that happened, after losing you, losing Cassandra, nearly losing my job, I needed to figure out who I wanted to be. Sarah's program helps women in situations like you were in when I was growing up." Sarah squeezed his arm gently. "Marcus told me about your story, the real story, not the sanitized version he used to tell. About working 3 jobs, selling your grandmother's ring, going without meals so he could have opportunities. What you accomplished as a single mother is extraordinary. What's extraordinary is that it took me 57 years to realize I was extraordinary, I replied, wiping my hands on my apron. But thank you. Marcus also told me about the lottery win and how you left to discover yourself. I have to say, as someone who works with women trying to rebuild their lives, your story is incredibly inspiring. I studied my son's face as Sarah spoke. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen since he was a child, genuine humility. The way he looked at Sarah was different, too, not possessive or proud, but grateful, as if he couldn't quite believe she'd chosen to be with him. "Mom," Marcus said quietly, "there's something I want to tell you. Sarah and I are getting married." My heart did a small flip, but not from joy, from fear. Fear that we were about to repeat the same pattern, that I was about to be evaluated, once again for my suitability as a mother-in-law. "Congratulations," I said carefully. "That's wonderful news. We want you to plan the wedding." I blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry?" Sarah stepped forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Marcus told me you're an incredible cook, and I've heard about this restaurant from everyone in town. We want the reception here, with you creating the menu. We want this to be a celebration that honors family, real family, not some stuffy social performance." "Sarah's parents are teachers," Marcus added. "Her father teaches high school math. Her mother runs an after-school program. They're amazing people, and they're so excited to meet you. Not because of the lottery money, they don't care about that, because they want to thank the woman who raised the man they're trusting with their daughter." I felt tears prick at my eyes, but these were different tears than I'd cried 2 years ago. These were tears of recognition, of a son who had finally learned the difference between impressing people and honoring them. "There's more," Marcus continued. "We've been talking about starting a foundation, using some of my savings and, well, if you're interested, maybe some of your lottery money, to help single mothers get the support they need. Education assistance, childcare, job training. We want to call it the Eleanor Pemberton Foundation." "Marcus," I whispered, overwhelmed. "Mom, I can't undo the 3 decades I spent taking you for granted. I can't take back the things I said or the way I treated you. But I can spend the rest of my life making sure other mothers don't have to choose between their dreams and their children's futures the way you did." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "We've already identified our first scholarship recipient. She's a 19-year-old single mother working 2 jobs while studying to be a nurse. Her name is Maria, and she reminds me so much of your story. Determined. Selfless, brilliant, but struggling with resources." I looked between my son and this remarkable woman he'd found, and realized that my transformation had created space for his own. The man standing in my kitchen wasn't the same person who had uninvited me from his engagement party. He was someone who had learned to value substance over surface, character over connections. "I have one condition," I said finally. They both looked at me expectantly. "The Foundation's first event will be held here at the restaurant, a dinner where we tell the stories of single mothers, not as objects of pity, but as the warriors they are. And Marcus, you're going to stand up and tell my story. The real story. How a woman who worked at a diner and cleaned offices and never went to college raised a son who became successful, and how that son almost lost everything because he forgot to honor the sacrifice that made his success possible." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I'd be honored to do that." 6 months later, Eleanor's table hosted the inaugural Eleanor Pemberton Foundation Gala. The dining room was filled with single mothers, their children, community leaders, and donors who understood that supporting families was an investment in the future. I watched from the kitchen door as Marcus stood at the podium, confident but humble, telling our story to a room full of people who understood its significance. He spoke about sacrifice and gratitude, about the danger of forgetting where you come from, and about the difference between being ashamed of your past and being shaped by it. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. But what moved me most was seeing Sarah in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the man she was about to marry. Not because he was successful or sophisticated, but because he had learned to honor the people who loved him. Later that evening, as the last guests were leaving, Marcus found me in the kitchen cleaning up. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think Dad would be proud of the man I've become?" I stopped washing dishes and turned to look at my son. Really look at him. The boy who had sworn to protect me when he grew up had become a man who actually could. "Your father left when you were 3 months old because he couldn't handle the responsibility of being a parent," I said. "You're about to start a foundation to help other parents succeed. You're marrying a woman who works with families like ours used to be. You've learned to value people for their character rather than their status. Honey, you've become everything he never was." "I learned it from watching you." "No, Marcus. You learned it from losing me and finding your way back. Some lessons can only be learned through loss." As we finished cleaning the kitchen together, the lottery winner and the young man she'd raised, I realized that my story had come full circle. But this wasn't the ending I'd once imagined, where my son's success validated my sacrifices. This was something better. A new beginning where we both understood that love isn't measured by what you're willing to sacrifice, but by what you're willing to become for each other. The lottery had given me $18 million, but watching my son grow into a man worthy of the love I'd always had for him, that was priceless. Some prizes, I'd learned, are worth more than money, and some transformations take a lifetime to complete. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.